I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Alison, who will talk about the history and auto-analysis of the World Congress on genetics applied to livestock production. Alison, the floor is yours.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. And let's see, we got that loaded. It's great to be here at the Young Scientist section, although looking out in the crowd, I think some of you might be at the wrong session. But anyway, it's amazing what free drinks will do, just saying. So it's my pleasure to present this talk on behalf of my co-authors. So Susanne and I put this together because it's almost 50 years since the first World Congress in Genetics Applied to Livestock Production was convened in Spain in 1974. And for those young people, I don't know if you remember exactly, but that's only about 20 years after the double helix structure was described. And so it was a long time ago. And we thought it would be interesting for the young people in the audience to get a little bit of a history of this Congress, because it does have a rich tradition. And so we had a look at the kind of the background of it. So typically the governance of the World Congress is under the auspices of a local organizing committee, as you have seen demonstrated here with the Dutch. And originally it was chaired by Carlos Luis de Cunha from the University of Madrid. And then after that, Alan Robertson from the University of Edinburgh joined him in creating a permanent international committee. And that committee is kind of traditionally primarily responsible for evaluating the bids that come in from different countries around the world to have this Olympics of basically livestock genetics that we have. And Bill Hill, who's been mentioned a couple of times today from the University of Edinburgh, was at one stage the president of the committee, and both he and Gordon Dickinson from the USA were two honorary members of the Permanent International Committee. So this paper that's targeted for the early career scientist session really details the history and evolution of the World Congress, and also has a look at a bit of the gender composition of the Permanent International Committee, session chairs, plenary and invited speakers of the authors. And our rationale for preparing this paper was we've been at this Congress for many, many years. And this is actually pictures of myself at my first World Congress, which was in 94 in Guelph. That's the Niagara Falls trip, and you can see Susanne at her first Congress in Armidale, and I'm happy to say that neither of us have changed our hairstyle in 30 years, and so, you know, it's good to see. But really, our rationale was that we have participated in the World Congress since the 90s, and we have both been the first female from our countries on the Permanent International Committee, and we are very dedicated to ensuring that we have speakers have equal opportunity to speak at World Congress, and we also have been around so long that we know people, and so we were able to ask some of the more senior scientists about the data for the World Congress makeup over the years. And we care about the World Congress, and we thought that this would be an interesting retrospective examination. So just in terms of where the Congress has been, this is the 12th World Congress, and you can see listed there where it's been over the years. And I think it's interesting to see that the number of proceedings papers has increased over time, with the exception of the conferences in Australasia. And most likely it is due to the very long trip that involves for the mostly European and American audiences that have attended this. And so typically the format of World Congresses has included an invited speaker that kind of leads off a topic area, and then invitations were typically made on the recommendation of the local organising committee. And subsequent conferences kind of took these 6 topics that were in vogue back in 1974, and some of them continue to this day. But I think we've seen new fields added over time, like transgenic animal research, molecular genetics, and genomics were included as they became established. And I think this conference, 2022 in Rotterdam, the focus of the sessions has been shifting even more to include a diverse range of societal challenges relevant for animal breeding, such as the ethics of genome editing, insects, to really not just focused solely on the development of methodologies, but more encompassing in terms of some of the societal issues and implications of our work. And I think that that change reflects the tremendous social development that has been going on in our society since the First World Congress was held in 1974, and moreover, really profound changes in academia during this time. So our materials and methods, we basically got information about the authors from the papers from the World Congress Digital Archive, which has really been spearheaded by the group in New Zealand. And the data there contains 24,351 author records, detailing the author's name, the year the paper was presented, and the title of the paper, and which particular topic they were speaking on. And then there's actually a program called Genderize that you can run names through, and it will tell you what its best guess as to that person's gender is. And so that was basically how we did that. Unfortunately, prior to 2014, we mostly just had initials, so J.C. Smith or whatever. And so it was more difficult to get the gender in the earlier congresses. And so if it was unassigned, we tried to curate it manually, and that was based on going to the library. And so there I am in the UC Davis Library with the egghead there, and we would go through the Web of Science to look for same authored papers that maybe had a gender to help us there, or Google profiles, which works great with recent scientists, but it's not so good for some of the older scientists. And then the gender of plenary speakers prior to 2014 and the members comprising of the Permanent International Committee were manually curated. And then we also did an analysis of any individual who was an author on at least 15 or more World Congress papers were examined as a group. So that's our materials and methods. So this is a breakdown of the number of papers over time and the number of authors. And I think it's interesting to look at the increase in the number of authors over time, which mirrors a trend whereby the average number of co-authors per paper published has increased steadily over the past century in all scientific disciplines, representing the more multidisciplinary nature and kind of multi-author culture that's developed over time. This particular slide breaks down the plenary speakers, the chairs, and the invited speakers. And for many years, both the Permanent International Committee and the local organising committee were comprised, if not entirely, predominantly of men. And the dearth of women in the World Congress of Genetics Applied to Livestock Production initially can possibly be explained by the number of women that were actively participating in the field over time. So there was much less women involved in the early days, but it has been generally observed that the proportion of female speakers really differs very dramatically by the gender of the organising committee, with male organised symposia tending to have fewer female speakers than those organised by women or even a mix of genders. And it's also been found that blinded submissions of abstracts as to author and institution also results in more women being chosen as symposium speakers. So a little bit of history. To our knowledge, Helen Newton-Turner from Australia was the first female invited speaker back in 1974, and she was also a member of the Permanent Organising Committee. Susanne Hermesch is the first woman to be voted president of this committee just in 2018. And Yvette de Haas at this meeting was the first female co-leading the local organising committee in 2022. We believe the first invited female plenary speaker, so that's the morning speakers at the 8:30 a.m. slots at this conference, was actually Jenny Marshall-Graves from Australia, and that was in 1988 at the Armidale conference. There has been a continuous increase in the proportion of women on the Permanent International Committee from 5% in 2010 to 33% in 2022, although at the meeting last night I challenged that number. I think it's pretty close to 50-50 at this stage. And the local organising committee, as I've mentioned, tends to decide the plenary speakers and chairs, and they've included more women in 2014 and 2018, as you can see. I think reflecting an increased awareness to ensure that there is gender balance in the keynote presentations. And so this figure shows the 201 authors that have had 15 or more papers presented at multiple World Congresses. And there's a few notable names that I'll read out here to embarrass people. So Jack Deckers, who first presented in 1994, was, at the time we did this analysis, the most prolific author with 64 papers, closely followed by John Williams, who first presented in 1990 with a total of 62. So you nipped him by 2 there, Jack. The most prolific female author was Lucia Albuquerque with 35 papers, who first presented in 1994. Now, here's the long stayers. So 2 authors, Mike Goddard and Moshe Solar, had papers at each of the first 11 congresses. And I actually had a look, and Mike Goddard has papers at this conference too. So he's had papers at every single conference, and he's got a remarkable 9 papers that he's either an author or co-author on at this Congress. And so I think if we were doing estimated breeding values, Mike Goddard has stayability, livability, and it's unheard of, but he also has likability. So he really is he is what you would like in a scientist. So that was pretty cool. And so Karen Meyer was the first, was the female author with the highest World Congress in Genetics applied to livestock production attendance. And she participated in conferences from 82 through 2018. So this breakdown of the most prolific authors shows that there is a gender difference, and we actually statistically tested that. It's got a p-value of 0.005, in that the average number of papers per author in this highly prolific group tends to be higher for males as compared to females. And if you control for the year of the first Congress attended, so that most likely gets people of similar ages, where you can do a kind of an apples to apple comparison. If we look at any author that had their first paper in 2002, and that they were there's quite a big group of them that attended subsequent World Congresses, there was on average about 6 more papers that the males authored or co-authored relative to the females of that same contemporary group, for want of a better expression. And so in 2006, of the 2006 first-time authors, there was 10 male and 1 female author that had 15 or more papers by 2018. And of the 2010 cohort, only 2 authors had 15 or more papers by 2018, and they were both male. But I think there's some encouraging trends, and I'll embarrass Daniela now. Of the 2014 first-time authors, there was a single female author, Daniela, who had 15 or more papers by the 2018 Congress. So she first attended in 2014, she had 15 by 2018, and she has a remarkable 21 papers at this Congress, where she's either the author or co-author. And so I'm not sure if that's a record, but it's a pretty impressive number. So well done, Daniela. So this is a breakdown then of what we were able to do for gender, and you'll notice the grey square there. Those are the congresses where we only had first initials to work off, and so we had to do some digging, and there were just some names that were so common that it was just not possible to work out who they were, and so in that case we just assigned them. They weren't included in the gender counts here. So basically the bottom line is that we have less confidence in the data prior to the 2014 and 2018 congresses, where we had full names were keyed in such that we were able to get a better read from gender eyes. So I think that what I see is a really positive trend in the ones we were able to get a good estimate of breakdown in the most recent one. So of the 2014 first-time authors, what was really encouraging, I think, is that there was about equal numbers of women and men that all returned as an author on paper presented in the 2018 congresses, and there was no difference there in terms of gender. And of the 801 papers that were originally submitted to the New Zealand conference, where we had really good detailed data, there was about 80 withdrawn. It was approximately an equal number from both genders. And of the papers that were accepted, it was about 38 that were presented in live sessions, and there was no difference as it relates to gender there. So I think that the trends are heading in a direction that is showing greater kind of diversity of speakers, and I guess our recommendations based on this finding would be I think it would be really helpful in the next congresses to have authors include their ORCID ID so that we don't have to run it through Genderize. And also I think it would be useful for future analysis like this to keep track of that type of thing. And we are strongly encouraging the representation of women and early career scientists and scientists from developing countries into key positions of the local organising committee. And I guess our advice to the young scientists here is speak up at these congresses. They can be a little overwhelming, especially when there's names that you've heard, but speak up, ask questions, get noticed, because when you're asking speakers, it's a risk. You want to have good speakers, and so if you get known and you're active in the sessions and ask good questions, you're more likely perhaps to get an invitation to be a speaker. And we encourage all of the early career scientists to speak up, and we believe that both of these aspects will, the greater gender diversity of the organising committees and chairs and increased courage of early career scientists to get noticed will lead to a greater diversity of session chairs, invited speakers and attendees at the future World Congress conferences. Thank you very much.